The rain had already soaked the streets of Manhattan by the time Sarah Miller stepped out of the family court building. She held a thin envelope in one hand and her 6-year-old son Ethan's tiny hand in the other. The envelope contained only a few sheets of paper, but to Sarah, it felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. 7 years of marriage had officially ended. No shouting. No dramatic goodbye. Just signatures, silence, and 2 people walking away from each other forever. Ethan looked up at his mother with innocent eyes. "Mom, are we going home?" Sarah forced a smile, even though her heart felt like it had shattered into thousands of pieces. "We are, sweetheart, just to a different home." A yellow taxi pulled over. Sarah placed their 2 small suitcases in the trunk before helping Ethan into the back seat. As the taxi crossed the Queensboro Bridge, she looked at the New York skyline. Millions of people lived in this city, yet she had never felt so completely alone. 3 months earlier, life had looked very different. Sarah believed she had the perfect family. Her husband, Daniel, worked as a financial consultant in Manhattan. She had left her marketing career after Ethan was born so she could raise their son. She trusted Daniel completely. Until one evening, she accidentally discovered messages on his laptop. They weren't business emails. They were romantic conversations with another woman that had been going on for almost a year. At first, Sarah convinced herself there had to be an explanation. But there wasn't. Daniel admitted everything. "I'm in love with someone else." Those words destroyed everything Sarah believed about love, loyalty, and marriage. She fought to save their family. She suggested counseling. She begged him to think about Ethan. She cried through countless sleepless nights. But Daniel had already made his choice. Weeks later, the divorce papers arrived. Now, with only $1,240 left in her savings account, Sarah and Ethan were starting over. The taxi stopped in front of an old apartment building in Queens. The landlord handed Sarah a small key. "The apartment isn't fancy," he said, "but it's clean." The room was barely large enough for one adult, let alone a mother and child. There was a worn-out bed, a tiny kitchen, and a single window facing the elevated subway tracks. Every few minutes, a train thundered past, shaking the entire room. Ethan looked around quietly. "Mom, is this really our new house?" Sarah knelt beside him. "It's small, but we'll make it our home." That night, after Ethan fell asleep holding his favorite stuffed bear, Sarah sat alone by the window. She checked her bank balance again. $1,240. Rent was due in 2 weeks. She had no job. No nearby family. No one she could call for help. Outside, New York never slept. Sirens echoed through the streets. People laughed in nearby restaurants. Cars rushed past beneath the glowing city lights. Yet inside that tiny apartment, the silence was unbearable. Sarah looked at Ethan sleeping peacefully. She gently brushed his hair away from his forehead and whispered, "I don't know how we're going to survive, but I promise you this. No matter how hard life becomes, I will never let you lose your smile." She didn't realize it then. The hardest chapter of their lives was only beginning. The next morning, Sarah woke up before sunrise. For a few seconds, she forgot everything. Then she opened her eyes, looked around the tiny apartment, and reality hit her again. She was divorced. She had no job. She was responsible for a 6-year-old boy who depended on her for everything. Sarah quietly got out of bed so she wouldn't wake Ethan. She searched the small kitchen cabinet and found only half a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and 2 apples. That was all the food they had left. She made 2 peanut butter sandwiches. One for Ethan. The other, she wrapped in a napkin and secretly placed back in the cabinet. She wasn't hungry. At least, that's what she planned to tell her son. When Ethan woke up, he smiled. "Good morning, Mom." Sarah smiled back, hiding the fear in her eyes. "Good morning, buddy. Breakfast is ready." Ethan happily ate his sandwich. "Aren't you eating?" Sarah gently kissed his forehead. "I had coffee earlier." It was another lie. She hadn't eaten anything since yesterday afternoon. After breakfast, Sarah dressed in her only formal outfit and printed copies of her old resume at a nearby library. Before leaving, she looked at Ethan. "I'll be back before dinner. Mrs. Rodriguez from apartment 3B will stay with you for a few hours." The elderly neighbor had offered to help after learning Sarah was raising Ethan alone. "Don't worry," Mrs. Rodriguez said warmly. "Go find your future." Sarah thanked her and walked into the crowded streets of New York. For the next 8 hours, she visited office after office. Some never looked at her resume. Others politely smiled. "We'll call you." She heard those 3 words over and over again. But no phone calls came. By late afternoon, her feet hurt so badly she could barely walk. She sat on a bench in Bryant Park and checked her bank account. After paying the apartment deposit, transportation, and groceries, only $842 remained. Sarah stared at the screen. How long would that money last? 1 week? Maybe 2? She couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. His school. His clothes. His future. Tears slowly rolled down her face. She quickly wiped them away before anyone noticed. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry in public. That evening, she stopped at a grocery store. She carefully compared prices, putting several items back because they were too expensive. In the end, she bought only milk, eggs, rice, pasta, and a small bag of frozen vegetables. At the checkout counter, she counted every dollar twice before paying. When she returned home, Ethan ran toward her and hugged her tightly. "Mom, Mrs. Rodriguez helped me draw a picture." He proudly showed her a drawing of a little house. In the picture, there were only 2 people holding hands. Him and his mother. Sarah's heart broke. "Where's Dad?" she asked softly. Ethan looked down. "I didn't draw him. Because he doesn't live with us anymore." Sarah couldn't hold back her tears this time. She hugged Ethan as tightly as she could. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." That night, after Ethan fell asleep, Sarah opened her laptop. She searched every job website she could find. Receptionist, customer service, retail, assistant, warehouse, anything. She submitted application after application until nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. Just before closing the laptop, an email notification appeared. Her heart raced. She quickly opened it. It wasn't a job offer. It was a reminder that her first month's rent would be due in just 10 days. Sarah looked around the tiny apartment. For the first time since arriving in New York, she wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. And she had no idea that an even bigger challenge was waiting for her the very next morning. Sarah barely slept that night. The rent reminder kept replaying in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined the landlord knocking on the door, asking her and Ethan to leave. At 6:30 a.m., her phone rang. She grabbed it immediately, hoping it was one of the companies she had applied to. "Hello, this is Sarah Miller." "Good morning. This is Linda from Hudson Retail Group. We reviewed your resume and would like to interview you today at 11 a.m. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. "Yes, absolutely. I'll be there." After hanging up, she hugged Ethan. "I might get a job today." Ethan jumped with excitement. "Really? Does that mean we can buy pizza again someday?" Sarah smiled, even though tears filled her eyes. "I hope so, buddy." She dropped Ethan off with Mrs. Rodriguez and rushed to Manhattan. She arrived 20 minutes early, straightened her jacket, and quietly whispered to herself, "You can do this." The interview lasted almost 40 minutes. The hiring manager asked about her experience, her career gap, and why she had left her previous job. Sarah answered every question honestly. "I left work to raise my son. Now I'm ready to rebuild my career." The manager nodded politely. "We're interviewing several candidates. We'll contact you within a week." Those words felt painfully familiar. Another, "We'll contact you." Another uncertain wait. As Sarah left the building, dark clouds gathered over the city. Within minutes, heavy rain poured down. She had forgotten her umbrella. Completely soaked, she hurried toward the subway station. While walking down the stairs, her phone vibrated. It was Ethan's school registration office. "Mrs. Miller, we noticed some documents are still missing. Without them, we can't complete Ethan's enrollment." Sarah closed her eyes. Please, give me a little more time. We can extend the deadline by 3 days. Thank you. She hung up and leaned against the station wall. Everything seemed to be falling apart at the same time. A job she didn't have. Bills she couldn't afford. A son who needed a stable future. She silently whispered, God, I don't need an easy life. I just need one chance. That evening, Sarah returned home exhausted. Mrs. Rodriguez welcomed her with a gentle smile. Ethan has been waiting for you. Inside the apartment, Ethan ran over carrying a folded piece of paper. I made this for you. Sarah opened it. In colorful crayon letters, it read, My mom is my hero. Below the words was a drawing of Sarah wearing a superhero cape while holding Ethan's hand beneath the New York skyline. Sarah couldn't speak. She hugged her son so tightly that he laughed. Mom, you're squeezing me. For the first time since the divorce, Sarah smiled from the bottom of her heart. Later that night, after Ethan fell asleep, Sarah checked her email one last time. There was nothing. No job offer. No interview updates. Only bills. She placed her phone on the table and looked out the apartment window. A train roared past, shaking the room. Then she noticed something on the floor outside her apartment door. It was a white envelope. There was no stamp. No return address. Only her name written neatly across the front. Sarah Miller. With trembling hands, she picked it up. She had no idea that what was inside that envelope would completely change the direction of her life. Sarah closed the apartment door behind her and stared at the white envelope lying in her hands. There was no return address. No company logo. Nothing except her name written in neat black ink. For a moment, she thought it might be another bill. Or perhaps a legal notice connected to the divorce. She slowly opened it. Inside was a single folded letter and 5 crisp $100 bills. $500. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. Her hands began to shake. She unfolded the letter. It read, Sometimes life knocks good people down. This isn't charity. It's simply one parent helping another. Use this money for Ethan. One day, when you're able, help someone else who needs it. There was no signature. No explanation. Sarah looked around the hallway, hoping to see who had left it. But it was empty. She knocked on Mrs. Rodriguez's door. Did you leave this outside my apartment? The elderly woman looked surprised. No, dear. I didn't. Sarah asked a few other neighbors. Everyone gave the same answer. No one knew where the envelope had come from. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Who knew about her struggles? Why would a complete stranger help her? She didn't have the answers. But for the first time in weeks, she felt a tiny spark of hope. The next morning, Sarah used part of the money to buy groceries. Fresh fruit, chicken, milk, eggs. For the first time since moving to New York, Ethan ate a full breakfast. His smile made every dollar worth it. Later that afternoon, Sarah received another phone call. It was Hudson Retail Group. Her heart pounded. Hello, Sarah speaking. Hi, Sarah. We were impressed with your interview. We'd like to offer you a temporary customer service position. The pay is modest, and the contract is only for 3 months. Are you interested? Sarah covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Yes, absolutely. When can you start? I can start tomorrow. After hanging up, she sat silently on the couch. Then she cried. Not because she was weak, but because after weeks of rejection, someone had finally believed in her. That evening, she celebrated with Ethan by making homemade pasta. It wasn't a fancy dinner, but to them, it felt like a feast. Ethan looked at his mother with bright eyes. Mom, does this mean everything will be okay now? Sarah smiled gently. I don't know if everything will be okay right away, but I promise we'll keep moving forward. The next morning, she woke up before dawn, ironed her clothes, packed a simple lunch, and kissed Ethan goodbye. As she walked toward the subway station, she felt something she hadn't felt since the divorce. Hope. She believed the hardest days might finally be behind her. But she had no idea. Her first day at work was about to test her strength in ways she had never imagined. Sarah barely slept the night before her first day at work. She woke up at 5 a.m., quietly made breakfast, packed Ethan's lunch, and carefully ironed the only business outfit she owned. She looked at herself in the mirror and whispered, "This is your second chance. Don't waste it." After dropping Ethan off at school, she rushed to the subway. The train was packed with people heading to work. Everyone seemed confident and focused, while Sarah sat silently, wondering if she truly belonged among them. Hudson Retail Group occupied 3 floors of a modern office building in Midtown Manhattan. The glass lobby, polished marble floors, and busy employees made her feel nervous. At the reception desk, she introduced herself. "Good morning. I'm Sarah Miller. Today is my first day." A smiling HR coordinator greeted her and led her to the training room, where 6 other new employees were waiting. The morning went smoothly. They learned about the company's systems, customer service policies, and workplace rules. Sarah listened carefully, taking notes on every detail. By afternoon, they began handling real customer calls. Sarah's first customer was polite. The second thanked her for solving a billing issue. Then came the third call. A furious customer shouted into the phone before Sarah could even introduce herself. "You people are useless. I've been calling for 3 days." Sarah remained calm. "I'm very sorry you're experiencing this. Let me see how I can help." The man continued yelling, insulting her personally even though the problem had nothing to do with her. When the call finally ended, Sarah's hands were shaking. Her supervisor, Melissa, walked over. "You handled that better than most new employees. Don't take it personally." Sarah nodded. She wanted to appear strong. But inside, she was exhausted. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls, computer screens, and endless customer complaints. By the time her shift ended, her head was pounding. She hurried to Ethan's after-school program to pick him up. When he saw her, he ran into her arms. "Mom, how was your first day?" Sarah smiled. "It was hard, but I made it." On the subway ride home, Ethan leaned against her shoulder and quietly fell asleep. Sarah looked at her son's peaceful face and felt a mix of pride and sadness. This little boy trusted her completely. She couldn't afford to fail. When they reached their apartment, Sarah opened the mailbox. Among the usual advertisements was a letter from her landlord. Her heart raced. She opened it immediately. The letter informed tenants that beginning next month, the building's rent would increase because of rising maintenance costs. Sarah froze. She had only just found a temporary job. Now her monthly rent was going up. She slowly looked around their tiny apartment. Every dollar she earned already had a purpose. Food, school supplies, transportation, utilities. There was almost nothing left. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. She wrote down every expense. Then she crossed out anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. No coffee, no new clothes, no entertainment, no unnecessary spending. Still, the numbers didn't work. She quietly wiped away a tear before closing the notebook. Outside, the lights of New York glittered like endless opportunities. Inside that small apartment, Sarah realized something painful. Getting a job wasn't the end of her struggle. It was only the beginning. And within days, she would receive news that threatened to take away the one thing she had fought so hard to protect: her son's future. The next morning began like any other. Sarah woke up before sunrise, made breakfast, packed Ethan's lunch, and helped him get ready for school. As they walked toward the bus stop, Ethan looked up at her with a bright smile. "Mom, can we go to the park after school today?" Sarah wished she could say yes. She gently smiled and replied, "Not today, buddy. I have a lot of work. But I promise we'll go this weekend." "Promise?" "I promise." Ethan smiled and hugged her before getting on the school bus. Sarah watched the bus disappear around the corner before heading to work. At Hudson Retail Group, the office was busier than usual. The phones never stopped ringing and customers seemed more frustrated than ever. Just as Sarah logged into her computer, her phone vibrated. Ethan's elementary school. Her heart skipped a beat. She answered immediately. "Hello, this is Sarah. Good morning, Mrs. Miller. This is MS. Anderson, Ethan's school counselor. Don't worry, Ethan isn't physically hurt. But we'd like you to come to the school today if possible. Sarah's stomach tightened. Is everything okay? We'd rather discuss it with you in person. Sarah immediately requested permission from her supervisor to leave for an hour. Melissa looked at Sarah's worried face and nodded. Go. Family comes first. Less than 30 minutes later, Sarah arrived at Ethan's school. MS. Anderson welcomed her into a quiet counseling office. Several drawings were spread across the desk. They're Ethan's artwork, she explained. Sarah picked up the first drawing. It showed a small house with only 2 people standing outside. A mother. And a little boy. The second drawing was almost the same. But the third one made Sarah stop breathing. It showed Ethan standing alone while a man walked away into the distance. There were tears drawn on the little boy's face. Sarah slowly looked at the counselor. What does this mean? Ms. Anderson spoke gently. Ethan has become much quieter over the past few weeks. He doesn't play with the other children as much anymore. And today, she paused. He asked me a question. Sarah's voice trembled. What did he ask? The counselor looked down for a moment before answering. He asked, did my dad leave because he doesn't love me anymore? Sarah felt her heart break into pieces. She covered her mouth, trying not to cry. She had expected Ethan to miss his father, but she never imagined he would blame himself. Ms. Anderson placed a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. Children often believe divorce is somehow their fault. He needs reassurance. He needs to know he is loved. Sarah nodded through tears. I'll do everything I can. That evening, after bringing Ethan home, Sarah cooked his favorite macaroni and cheese. While they ate dinner, Ethan quietly asked, Mom? Yes, sweetheart. Did I do something bad? Sarah immediately put down her fork. What do you mean? Maybe Dad left because of me. Sarah rushed around the table and hugged him tightly. No, Ethan. She gently held his face. Listen to me very carefully. You did absolutely nothing wrong. Your dad's decision had nothing to do with you. You are the greatest gift I've ever received. I will love you every single day for the rest of my life. Ethan wrapped his small arms around her. I love you too, Mom. Later that night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Sarah sat quietly beside his bed. She realized she wasn't just fighting to pay rent anymore. She was fighting to protect her son's heart. At exactly 10:37 p.m., her phone rang. The screen displayed an unknown number. She answered cautiously. Hello. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a familiar male voice spoke. Sarah, it's Daniel. Her ex-husband had finally called. But the reason for his call would shake both Sarah and Ethan's lives once again. Sarah froze the moment she heard Daniel's voice. For nearly 3 months, he had been completely silent. No phone calls. No messages. No questions about Ethan. Now, out of nowhere, he was calling. She took a deep breath. What do you want, Daniel? There was a long pause before he answered. I've been thinking about you, about Ethan, about everything. Sarah remained silent. Then he continued. I made a mistake. Those 4 words might have meant everything months ago. Tonight, they meant almost nothing. You made your choice, Sarah replied calmly. I know, Daniel whispered. But people can change. Sarah looked toward Ethan's bedroom. Her little boy was sleeping peacefully, hugging his stuffed bear. Why are you calling now? She asked. Daniel sighed. The relationship I left you for, it's over. Sarah closed her eyes. So it wasn't guilt. It wasn't love. It was loneliness. For the first time since the divorce, she felt no anger. Only disappointment. You didn't call because you missed your family, she said quietly. You called because the person you chose over us left you. Daniel didn't answer. His silence said enough. Finally, he spoke again. I'd like to see Ethan. Sarah thought carefully before answering. He deserves to know his father. But you don't get to walk in and out of his life whenever it's convenient. If you want to be part of his life, you need to prove that you're serious. Daniel agreed. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. The call ended. Sarah sat quietly in the dark apartment for several minutes. She wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about Ethan. Would seeing his father heal him? Or hurt him even more? The next morning, Sarah focused on work. Business had been unusually busy, and every employee was under pressure. Near lunchtime, Melissa called Sarah into her office. Sarah's heart raced. Had she made a mistake? Was she about to lose her job? Instead, Melissa smiled. "I've been reviewing your performance." Sarah waited nervously. "You've received excellent customer feedback. We'd like to extend your temporary contract and discuss a permanent position if you continue performing this well." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Really?" Melissa nodded. "You've earned it." Sarah left the office with tears in her eyes. For the first time in months, something good had happened because of her hard work. That evening, she picked Ethan up from school. As they walked home, Ethan looked unusually happy. "Mom, what is it?" "My teacher says I'm getting better at reading." Sarah smiled proudly. "I knew you could do it." Then Ethan asked the question she had been dreading. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Is Dad ever coming back?" Sarah stopped walking. She looked into her son's hopeful eyes. She knew that whatever answer she gave would stay with him for years. Before she could speak, her phone vibrated. A text message from Daniel appeared on the screen. "I'm outside your apartment building. I'd like to see Ethan, if you'll let me." Sarah slowly looked toward the street ahead. Standing across the road was Daniel. It would be the first time father and son had seen each other since the divorce. Sarah stood frozen outside the apartment building. Across the street was Daniel, the man she once believed would be beside her forever, the man who had broken her heart. And now, the man who wanted to see their son again. Ethan looked up at his mother. "Mom, is that Dad?" Sarah looked down at him. She saw excitement in his eyes. A child's hope. A hope she didn't want to destroy. She gently held his hand. "Yes, sweetheart. That's your dad." Daniel slowly walked toward them. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Ethan ran forward. "Dad." Daniel immediately dropped to his knees and hugged his son. "I'm sorry, buddy." Ethan held onto him tightly. "I missed you." Those 3 words hurt Sarah more than she expected, because she knew Ethan had been waiting for his father every single day. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "I missed you too." Sarah watched silently. Part of her was angry. Another part of her was relieved to see Ethan happy. But deep inside, she was afraid. Afraid that Daniel would disappear again. After a few minutes, they went inside the apartment. Daniel looked around. The small room. The old furniture. The simple kitchen. His expression changed. "You've been living here?" Sarah nodded. "We're doing okay." Daniel looked at her. "You don't have to pretend with me." Sarah smiled sadly. "I learned a long time ago that pretending doesn't change reality." The room became silent. Daniel looked down. "I didn't realize how much you were struggling." Sarah answered calmly. "You weren't there to see it." The words hurt because they were true. Daniel stayed for dinner. Ethan talked nonstop. He showed his father his school drawings, his favorite toys, and the books he was learning to read. For a few hours, the apartment felt almost normal. Almost like the family they used to be. But Sarah knew better. A few good hours couldn't erase months of pain. Before leaving, Daniel stood near the door. "I want to make things right." Sarah looked at him. "What does that mean?" "I want to be a better father." She nodded. "Then start by being consistent." "I don't need promises, Daniel." "Ethan doesn't need words. He needs actions." Daniel accepted her words. "I understand." Over the next few weeks, Daniel started visiting Ethan regularly. He helped with homework. He attended school events. He called when he said he would. Slowly, Ethan began smiling more. Sarah noticed the change. But she also noticed something else. She was changing too. She no longer waited for Daniel. She no longer wondered why she wasn't enough. She was building her own life. At work, Sarah continued proving herself. Her temporary position became permanent. Her manager even offered her a small promotion. For the first time in years, she had financial stability. One Friday evening, Sarah received her first full paycheck. She stared at the number on the screen. It wasn't a fortune. But to her, it represented freedom. She bought Ethan a new pair of shoes and a small birthday gift he had wanted for months. That night, Ethan hugged the gift. "Mom, you're the best." Sarah smiled. "No, buddy. You are the reason I never gave up." Later, after Ethan went to sleep, Sarah sat by the window. The same window where she had cried months ago. But tonight was different. The city lights didn't look lonely anymore. They looked like possibilities. Then her phone rang. It was Daniel. Sarah answered. "Hello." His voice sounded nervous. "Sarah, I need to tell you something." She immediately sensed something was wrong. "What happened?" Daniel took a deep breath. "I received a job offer in another state." Sarah became silent. "Another state. Another goodbye." Daniel continued. "I don't know what to do." Sarah looked toward Ethan's room. She knew this decision would affect more than just Daniel. It would affect their son. Again, Sarah stood silently by the window, holding the phone against her ear. For months, she had worked so hard to create stability for Ethan. A new home, a new routine, a life where her son could finally feel safe. And now, once again, uncertainty had entered their lives. "Where's the job?" Sarah finally asked. "California," Daniel replied. The word felt heavy. California. Thousands of miles away from New York. Sarah looked toward Ethan's bedroom door. She could hear her son quietly playing with his toys. The same child who had cried because he thought his father didn't love him. The same child who had finally started believing that his father would stay. "When do you have to decide?" Sarah asked. "By the end of the week." Sarah closed her eyes. "I see." There was silence between them. Then Daniel spoke. "I don't want to leave Ethan again." Sarah's voice became softer. "Then don't make a decision based only on what is best for you." Daniel understood what she meant. He had spent years choosing his own happiness first. Now he had to think about his son. The next few days were difficult. Ethan was excited about spending more time with his father. Every evening, he asked questions. "Mom, will Dad come to my school event? Mom, will Dad watch my soccer game?" Sarah always answered honestly. "I don't know, sweetheart." She refused to make promises she couldn't keep. Meanwhile, Sarah continued working hard. Her promotion came with more responsibility. She was now training new employees and managing customer accounts. Her supervisor, Melissa, noticed her dedication. "You know, Sarah, a lot of people would have given up after everything you've been through." Sarah smiled. "I almost did." Melissa looked surprised. "What stopped you?" Sarah thought about Ethan. "My son." That was always the answer. One Friday afternoon, Daniel asked Sarah to meet him at a small coffee shop near Central Park. When she arrived, Daniel looked different. Not physically. Emotionally. He looked like someone who had finally understood his mistakes. "I turned down the California job," he said. Sarah was surprised. "You did?" Daniel nodded. "I realized I spent too much time chasing things I thought would make me happy. I lost my family because I wasn't grateful for what I had." Sarah listened quietly. "I can't change the past, but I can become a better father." For the first time, Sarah saw genuine regret in his eyes. Not excuses. Not blame. Just regret. "I appreciate that," Sarah said. "But I need you to understand something." Daniel looked at her. "We are not going back to the way things were." "I know. The person I was before the divorce is gone." Sarah nodded. "Good. Because I don't want to go back either." Daniel looked surprised. Sarah continued. "I spent so much time trying to save our marriage that I forgot who I was. Now I'm finally finding myself again." Daniel smiled sadly. "You've changed." Sarah looked out the coffee shop window. "I had to." That evening, Sarah and Ethan walked home together. The city was filled with lights and noise. Ethan suddenly grabbed her hand. "Mom?" "Yes." "Are we going to be okay?" Sarah stopped. She knelt down and looked into his eyes. "Yes, buddy. We already are. Because we have each other." Ethan smiled. But Sarah didn't know. A new opportunity was about to enter her life. An opportunity that would test everything she had built. An opportunity that would force her to choose between the past she survived and the future she deserved. 6 months had passed since Sarah stepped into that small apartment in Queens with only 2 bags and a broken heart. Back then, she believed her life was over. She believed the divorce had taken everything from her. Her home, her marriage, her confidence. But she was wrong. The hardest moment of her life became the beginning of a new chapter. Sarah was now sitting in her own office at Hudson Retail Group, the same company where she had once walked in nervous and afraid. Now she was a team leader. Her desk was filled with small reminders of her journey. A picture of Ethan, a coffee mug he had made for her at school, and a small note that said, "My mom is my hero." She still kept it, because that note reminded her why she never gave up. One evening, Sarah arrived home earlier than usual. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. He looked up and smiled. "Mom, you're home early." Sarah laughed. "Yes, today I wanted to surprise you." Ethan jumped up and hugged her. Life wasn't perfect. There were still difficult days. There were still bills. There were still moments when the past hurt. But they were no longer struggling to survive. They were living. Daniel also became a better father. He never tried to force his way back into Sarah's life. Instead, he focused on being there for Ethan. He attended school meetings. He remembered birthdays. He kept his promises. And slowly, Ethan stopped worrying that his father would disappear again. One afternoon, Sarah watched Ethan playing in the park with Daniel. She smiled, not because she wanted her old life back, but because she finally understood something important. Sometimes people are not meant to return to the past. Sometimes they are meant to heal and move forward. A year after the divorce, Sarah returned to the same courthouse where her marriage had ended. Not because she was hurting, but because she had a meeting nearby. As she stood outside the building, she remembered the woman she had been that day. A woman holding divorce papers. A woman who didn't know how she would survive. A woman who was scared. Sarah smiled, because she wanted to tell that woman something. You will be okay. You will cry. You will struggle. You will have nights when you think you can't continue. But one day, you will look back and realize you were stronger than you ever imagined. That evening, Sarah and Ethan sat beside the window of their new apartment. It was bigger than their first home. There were plants near the window, family pictures on the wall, and laughter filling the rooms. Ethan looked at his mother. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart. Are you happy?" Sarah looked around. She looked at the life she had built. Then she smiled. "Yes, because I learned something." "What?" "Sometimes losing something doesn't mean your story is ending. Sometimes it means a better story is about to begin." Ethan hugged her. Outside, New York City continued moving. Millions of people were chasing their dreams, facing their battles, fighting their own silent struggles. And among them was Sarah Miller, a woman who lost everything, but found herself again. A woman who discovered that strength doesn't come from having an easy life. Strength comes from standing up every time life tries to break you.